In my talk last night, I was discussing the disparity between the way in which most human beings experience their own existence and the way man's being and nature is described in the sciences. I was pointing out that in such sciences as ecology and biology, ecology, for example, describes and studies the relationship between all organisms and their environments. The way in which they describe human, animal, and insect behavior is in flat contradiction with the way in which most of us experience our thinking and our action and our existence. We have been brought up to experience ourselves as isolated centers of awareness and action, placed in a world that is not us, that is foreign, alien, other, which we confront. Whereas, in fact, the way an ecologist describes human behavior is as an action. What you do is what the whole universe is doing at the place you call here and now. You are something the whole universe is doing in the same way that a wave is something that the whole ocean is doing. This is not what you might call a fatalistic or deterministic idea. You see, you might be a fatalist if you think that you are a sort of puppet which life pushes around. You are separate from life, but life dominates you. That's fatalism. But in the point of view I'm expressing, the real you is not a puppet which life pushes around. The real deep down you is the whole universe. And it's doing your living organism and all its behavior. It's expressing it as a singer sings a song. We've been hoodwinked into the feeling that we exist only inside our skins. And I was showing last night that that is a hallucination. It's just as nutty as anybody could be, like a fruitcake, you know, who thinks he's Napoleon or something or other. Thinks he's a poached egg and goes around finding a piece of toast to sit on. It's just like that, a hallucination. And I was showing how we need to experience ourselves in such a way that we could say that our real body is not just what's inside the skin, but our whole total external environment. Because if we don't experience ourselves that way, we mistreat our environment. We treat it as an enemy. We try to beat it into submission. And if we do that, comes disaster. We exploit the world we live in. We don't treat it with love and gentleness and respect. We cut down millions of acres of forests to turn it into newspaper, of all things. Lovely trees turned into information about nothing. and we don't replace them properly. We kick the world around in revenge for feeling that really we are puppets which the world kicks around. So my main point last night was then that we need a new kind of consciousness in which every individual becomes aware that his real self is not just his conscious ego. You know, let's take a headlight of a car. The headlight shines on the road in front. The headlight does not shine on the wire which connects it with its own battery. So in a way, the headlight is unaware of how it shines. And in the same way, we are unaware of the sources of our consciousness. We don't know how we know. There was a young man who said, though, it seems that I know, what I would like to see is the I that knows me when I know that I know that I know. And so we are ignorant of, we ignore, it doesn't come within the scope of our attention how it is that we manage to be conscious, how it is that we manage to grow our hair, to shape our bones, to beat our heart, and to secrete all the necessary fluids that we need from our glands. We do it, but we don't know how we do it. Because you see, underneath the superficial self, which pays attention to this and that, there is another self, more really us than I. And if you become aware of that unknown self, the more you become aware of it, the more you realize that it is inseparably connected with everything else that there is. That you are a function of this total galaxy bounded by the Milky Way, and that furthermore this galaxy is a function of all other galaxies. And that vast thing that you see far off with telescopes, and you look and look and look, one day you're going to wake up and say, why, that's me. And in knowing that, you see that you never die. That you are the eternal thing that comes and goes, that appears now as John Jones, now as Mary Smith, now as Betty Brown, and so it goes forever and ever and ever. Now then, why I made this point as an introduction to what I want to say tonight is the problem of the relationship of man and nature. Do you know, in the history of philosophy, there are really three theories of nature. Incidentally, what do you mean when you use the word nature? What is nature study? Natural history. The museum of natural history. What do you expect to find there? Well, for many people, nature means the birds, the bees, and the flowers. It means everything that is not artificial. People think, for example, a building like this is not natural, it's artificial. The natural state of the human being is to be naked, but we wear clothes, and that's artificial. We build houses. Is there any difference between a human house and a wasp's nest? Or a bird's nest? Not really. But we do have in our minds, you see, the idea that nature is somehow outside us. We've got some nature in us. We say there's a thing called human nature, and mostly bad. Human nature, according to Dr. Freud, is motivated by the libido. And you know what that is. You can't trust it. In the old days, they used to beat it with whips, but Freud said, don't do it that way. You have to treat it as a good horse trainer trains a horse by giving it a lump of sugar every now and then, and get it controlled that way. Be kind to it, respect it, even though it's really very, very disrespectable. Well, now, there are, as I said, in the history of mankind, 3 theories of nature. The first theory is the Western theory, which is that nature is a machine or an artifact. We inherit this from the Hebrews, who believed that nature was made by God in somewhat the same way as a potter makes a pot out of clay, or a carpenter makes a table out of wood. It is not insignificant that Jesus is the son of the carpenter. Our tradition has been to look upon the world as a construct, and somebody knows how it was put together. Somebody understands, and that is the constructor, the architect, the Lord God. But it so happened that in the 18th century, Western thought began to change. They became increasingly doubtful as to whether there was a maker, whether there was a God, but they continued to look upon the creation as an artifact, as a machine. And by the time of Newton, people were explaining the world in terms of mechanism. And we are still under the influence of that idea, because after all, in things like Life magazine and so on, when they give you an article on human physiology, they usually make drawings which show the human being as a kind of mechanism, as a sort of factory. And they show how the peristaltic action carries the food in, and how it's processed by this organ and that organ, as just as if a certain product is fed into a factory, cow at one end, and it comes out canned corned beef at the other. And that is why, just in such a way, ideas humans illustrated, and so a good judge is not somebody some kinds of rather degraded medicine that is now practiced. Their idea of justice when you go to the hospital, for God's sake, for a medical examination, you are treated as a machine. Let us have a conversation behind the scenes. You're not a person. You're put in a wheelchair immediately, because we know the perfectly healthy and can walk. Nevertheless, they have to have you in this wheelchair. Is a rascal, and they put you through a process. I know I am a rascal, and the heart specialist looks only at your heart, there can be a mutual arrangement between the otorhinolaryngologist, which means an ear, nose, and throat man, looks at that section of you. We call the judge in an unofficial. Maybe a psychiatrist takes a look at you, and the judge hums and haws, and if he's a good so on and so on. Everybody looks at you from their specialized point of view, as if they were a bunch of mechanics examining your automobile. I'm going to talk to you about another meaning, because, as I said last night, later on, but it's we just asked for this. Lee, because most justice us consider ourselves, but you can't write it down, inside our bodies, which we own in the same way. There's another word for justice. When it goes wrong, you take it to Chinese to fix it. And this word really identify with your body, just as you don't really identify with your car. In its Chinese character form, a cauldron. So here is this whole theory of nature, which has grown up in the West, and a knife as an artifact. Something in the high and far off times of Chinese history. Now let me take a second. There was an emperor of nature. This is when the people brought their sacrifices of East meat and so on to be put in the cauldron. Nature, not as an artifact, but as with a knife on the side of the cauldrons, the laws of the state. so that all the people
basic to all Hindu thought is the idea that the world is Maya. But the sages who advised
that
this
is a Sanskrit word,
said that was a very bad thing to
many
do.
things. It means magic,
because the moment
illusion,
people see the law written down,
art,
they develop a litigious spirit. That is to say, they think out ways
all the
of
words
wrangling around it.
And in the Hindu
And
idea,
that's what
there
we do
is
all the time.
The ultimate reality
the
of
moment
the
Congress
universe
passes a law,
is the self,
tax law especially,
which they call
all
Brahman.
the lawyers get together and they think they fill it full of holes.
That's what there is.
They say, well, it didn't define this and it didn't say
The self.
that. Universal,
And some of those
eternal,
Confucians
boundless, wanted to put
describe
the language in order and to make all the words mean
And
just
everything
so,
that happens
on the self. But the
Taoists
Taoists laughed at them
it's
and
on
said,
me.
if you define the
Drinks
words,
tonight are on
with
me.
what words are you going to define the words?
Or
that
like
define
we
the
say,
words?
when you hear the radio, it's on
So
the
they
speaker.
said, therefore, the emperor should not
see,
have
everything you
written
hear
the
on
laws
the
down.
radio,
Because a sense of justice,
flutes,
is not
drums,
something you can put in
human
words.
voices,
Traffic
what our
noises,
lawyers call
any imaginable sound, all those
you talk
sounds
to any
are
lawyer,
vibrations of the
and
diaphragm.
in discussing various judges around
But
town,
the radio doesn't
he will
tell you
say,
that.
well, Judge so-and-so
The
is
announcer
pretty much a
doesn't come
stickler
on
for
and
the
say
letter of the
every
law.
morning,
But on the other
good
hand,
morning, ladies and
Judge
gentlemen,
so-and-so has a sense of
this
equity.
is KQED. He knows
The following
when the
sounds
law
that
that
you're
the
going
letter
to
of
hear
the
are
law just
vibrations
doesn't apply to
of
this
your-
the
the
diaphragm in your speaker.
And he just has an
And they're
innate
not
sense of fair play.
really, that's the man
human
to be
voices
trusted as a judge, or musical instruments, but
So
just
this
that.
is what the Chinese mean
They never
by
let
judge
you in on
who
it.
has the sense of Li, of real justice.
And
It
in
can't be
exactly
written
the
down,
same
it can't
way,
be explained.
the universe
because every case
doesn't
is
let you in
individual.
on the truth that
But
all
what
sense
such a man has
experiences
fundamentally in his heart,
are vibrations
he trusts
of the
self.
good and bad of human nature. Not just yourself.
Human beings
but the self.
are complex.
And all of us share this self in
We
common.
don't know ourselves
Because
at
it is
all,
pretending to be all of us.
Consider your nervous system.
Brahman,
Neurologists haven't
the ultimate
even begun to
principle,
figure it out.
plays hide and seek.
Yet
eternally.
all your conscious decisions are based
And he does
on
it
this
for
thing that you
unspeakably
don't
long
understand.
periods of time. The Hindus measure time in what
You're
is called a
unbelievably
kalpa.
more
K-A-L-P-A.
wise
That's
in your
4,320,000
than you ever
years.
will be in your conscious
Don't take this seriously.
thoughts.
It's not meant to be taken literally, because behind
But
your
just for an
conscious thoughts
unspeakably
lies
long
your
time,
nervous system. The Brahman, the self, pretends that it's lost. And if you say, and is
Well,
us,
my nervous system is
and
under
all our adventures and all our troubles,
It is just a bunch
and all
of
our
very
agonies and
strange,
tragedies,
weird
mixed
biological
up.
chances that have got mixed up somehow.
Then after the period
Then this
of
very opinion that you're
4,320,000
expressing
years has elapsed,
see,
there
there
is
is
a
a
function of that nervous system. The universe
So you're
is
saying
destroyed
that
in
you
fire.
are a total
And after
hoax.
that, the Brahman
You can't
wakes
trust
up
yourself at all.
and says, well, so good, crazy, what
That
an
is
adventure that was.
a set of
Wipes
game
the sweat off
rules
his
that
brow.
don't lead anywhere.
It's totally
Rest a while.
self-frustrating. So for another 4,320,000 years, the divine self
So you
rests
see what the
and knows
Chinese
who it
have
is.
developed here
It's me.
is a theory of nature.
Then
I
it
said
says,
there's
well,
three
this is
theories.
rather boring. The
Let's get
Western
going again.
mechanical theory.
Let's get mixed
nature
up.
as an artifact.
And it does
The
it in a
Hindu
very
dramatic
strange
way
theory.
because
And
the
the
way the
Chinese
Hindus time it,
organic
the
theory.
first period of getting mixed up,
Nature,
getting lost,
human nature
is beautiful.
included,
That's the
is
longest
an
period.
organism. And an organism
Everything's right. It's just life
a
is glorious.
system
Then it
of
has the next
orderly
period in
anarchy.
which things get a little wonky. There is no boss in it. Something is vaguely out of order. But that doesn't
gets
last so
along
long.
By being
Then the
left
next
alone
period, the
and being
third,
allowed to do its stuff.
Is when good and evil are equally balanced.
That's what the Chinese Taoist
That's
philosophy calls
still
the
not
Wu
so
Wei,
long. Finally comes the shortest
means
period when everything
not
bad
doing nothing,
triumphs.
not
The whole thing blows
interfering
up and we begin all
with
over again.
the course of events.
We're supposed to
Not
be living in that
acting
now.
against the grain.
Now
What's
this
called
is
the
the Kali
time.
Yuga, to introduce the second
Age
word
of
Li
darkness.
in Chinese. And it began on Friday, February the 23rd. The first Li meant 1123 BC. The second Li, and it has
is a
5,000
character
years to run.
which had the original meaning,
But
of
as
the
it goes on,
markings in
time gets
jade,
faster, so don't worry.
the grain in wood,
fiber in muscle. And it's usually translated reason or the principle of things. These are not very good translations.
So you see, that's a theory
The
of
best
nature
translation
as a
of
drama is
a
organic
play.
pattern. Now there's a third theory.
Now look here.
Which is Chinese.
When you look at the clouds,
and this is very interesting.
they aren't symmetrical. They don't form fours.
The Chinese
They don't
word
come along
for
in
nature
cubes.
they call zhiran.
But you know at once that they're not a mess.
And this expression means of
A
itself.
dirty old
itself.
ashtray full of junk may be a mess, but clouds don't look
What
like
happens
that.
of itself. When you look at the patterns of foam on water, they never make an artistic
Or we
mistake.
might say
spontaneity. It
And they're not
almost
mess.
means automatic, because automatic
They are
is
wiggly,
what is self-moving.
but
Only
in a way orderly.
we associate the
and
word
it's
automatic
difficult
for us
the
to
machinery.
describe that kind of order.
Now take a look at yourselves.
But Ziran,
You're all wiggly.
what is so of itself
We
is
think,
associated in the
You know, we're
Chinese
pretty
mind, not with
ordinary
machinery,
because there are a lot of us
but
that
with
look approximately the same.
biology.
So when we see a human being, we think, well, that's
Your
pretty much in
hair
order
grows by
and
itself.
regular, and it's
You
okay.
don't have to think how to grow
We
it.
don't realize how
Your
wiggly
heart
we are.
beats
We're
by
just like
itself.
clouds,
You don't have
rocks,
to
and
make
stars.
up your mind how to beat it.
Look at the way the stars
That's
are
what they
arranged.
mean by nature. Do you criticize the way the stars are arranged? Would you like them to form fours? The poem says,
Would you like them to be,
doing nothing. Spring comes,
Sort of
set out
grass
like
grows of itself.
needlepoint on the canvas of the
So
skies.
their principle of nature.
There was
is
somebody
called
in the
Tao.
18th century, T-A-O,
In the days
pronounced
when they built
Tao
formal
in the
gardens
Mandarin
and
dialect.
clipped hedges and made all the tulips
Tao in the
stand together
Shanghai
like
dialect,
soldiers,
who criticized the stars
Tao
for being irregularly
in the
arranged.
Cantonese dialect. Take your choice.
But today we don't feel that way.
Tao
We love the way the stars are scattered,
means the course of nature
and they never make a mistake.
and their arrangement.
And
What about
Lao
mountain
Tzu,
ranges?
who was a philosopher who lived
Do you
a little
criticize
later than 400 the valleys
BC,
for being low,
wrote
praised
a book
the peaks
about
for
the
being
Tao.
high, and he said, the Tao which can be
You just
spoken
say it's
is
great,
not the
it's
eternal
the way
Tao.
it is.
You can't describe it.
Now that
He said the
kind of
principle of the Tao is spontaneity.
the artist
He
pays
said
a
the great
tribute
Tao
to it by painting a
flows
landscape.
everywhere, both to the left and to the right. It loves and nourishes all
People,
things, but does
you know,
not lord
in,
it
in
over.
every national park,
It
there's a place
accomplishes
called
merits
Inspiration Point
and
and lays no claim to them.
And people go there and they say, oh, it's
So
just
there is
like
a very
picture."
great difference between the Chinese idea of Tao,
And nobody
as the
knew
formal
this.
principle of nature, and the Judeo-Christian
400 years
idea
ago.
of God as
It
nature's
took the artists
Lord and Master.
To paint landscape, and then people
Because
realized
the Tao
how beautiful it is.
does not
Nowadays,
act as a
artists are painting in the Chinese philosophy of nature. Nature
has no boss.
pictures of damp, stained walls and floors.
There is no
where people have dropped a lot of paint.
principle that forces
One day people
things
will
to
walk
behave the way
into a
they
room
do.
where there's a lot
It is
of
a
paint and scattered
completely
on the floor,
democratic
and
theory
and they'll say,
of nature.
my goodness, it's just like a Jackson Pollock. Oh, ain't it just like a
See?
picture?
Most Westerners, whether they be Christians
It
or
always takes the
non-Christians,
artist
don't
to show us
trust
the
nature.
vision.
Of all things, nature
But of course,
is the
in the
thing
meantime,
least
it is
to be
difficult.
trusted. You must
You
manage
go to
it.
an exhibition
You must
of
watch out for
contemporary
it.
non-objective
It
painting.
will always go
The kind
wrong.
of square fellow walks
If you
in there and
don't
he
watch
says, that's
out.
not what I call a
The
picture.
goblins will get you if you don't watch out.
Because he
So we're
it's
always
against his
feeling
prejudices.
that
you can't trust him.
See, we're
But
absolutely
I say to people now,
instilled
excuse me,
with
wait a
the
minute.
idea of original sin.
Take a look at that again. I'm going to tell you something.
You can't trust nature.
That painting is a colored
because it comes
photograph.
out with weeds and insects.
And
Of
above all,
guess
you
what?
can't trust human nature. Because
He
if
looks
you
at
don't
it
hold
with
a club
astonishment,
over yourself,
entirely new eyes.
you'll go out and rape your grandmother.
What could that be a photograph of? He begins to see it might be a photograph through a
Now the
microscope
Chinese would say,
of globules.
if you
germs
can't trust
floating in
yourself,
liquid.
might be
You can't
anything.
trust
There it is. It suddenly comes at
Because
it.
if you can't trust yourself, can you trust your
Goodness
mistrust
knows whether
of
that was
yourself?
what the artist intended.
Is that
But
well-founded?
that's a method of giving people a shock.
Of seeing things in
See?
a new way.
If you can't trust yourself, you are totally mixed up. You know, you haven't a leg to stand on, you haven't a point of
visited
departure
Picasso
for
in
anything.
Paris during the war.
And in this
And
respect,
said, I can't
the
understand your
Taoist
thinking.
philosophy and the
Their
Confucian philosophy are in agreement. In Confucius philosophy, the fundamental virtue of a human being is called yang, spelled Jen for reasons best known to Chinese scholars. I don't know what they are, but it's pronounced yang. And it's a character, Chinese character, that Confucius placed as the highest of all virtues, higher than righteousness, higher than benevolence, and it means approximately human-heartedness. Now, Confucius once said that goody-goodies are the thieves of virtue. Virtue in Chinese is de. We Romanize it as T-E-H, de. And it means virtue not in the sense of moral propriety, but virtue in the sense of magic, as when we speak of the healing virtues of a certain plant. A man of true virtue is therefore a human-hearted man. And the meaning of this is that one should above all trust human nature in the full recognition that it's both good and bad, that it's both loving and selfish. Now, let me give an illustration of the wisdom of this. When people fight wars, I trust them if the reason for which they fight a war is to expropriate somebody else's possessions and women. Because they will fight a merciful war. They will not destroy the possessions and the women that they want to capture. They want to enjoy them. And that's a war based on simple, ordinary, everyday human greed. The most awful wars that are waged are the wars waged for moral principles. You are a lousy communist. You have a philosophy that is destructive to religion and to everything that we love and value and reverence, and therefore we will exterminate you to the last man unless you surrender unconditionally. Such wars are ruthless beyond belief. We can blow up whole cities, wipe people out, because we are not greedy. We are righteous. That is why the goody-goodies are the thieves of virtue. If you are going to do something evil, do it for a plain, honest, selfish motive. Don't do it in the name of God. Because if you do, it turns you into a monster who is no longer human. And that is why, in Chinese ideas of justice, a good judge is not somebody who abides by the book. Their idea of justice is, for God's sake, keep the case out of court. Let us have a consultation behind the scenes, and let's arrange a compromise. Because we know our opponent is a rascal, I know I am a rascal. And therefore there can be a mutual arrangement between thieves. So we summon her and we talk about it, and we call the judge in an unofficial capacity. And the judge hums and haws, and if he's a good judge, he has a sense of what is called li. I'm going to talk to you about another meaning of the word pronounced li later on, but it's quite a different word. Li is justice, but you can't write it down. There is another word for justice or law in Chinese, zi. And this word represents, in its Chinese character form, a cauldron for cooking sacrifices and a knife. In the high and far off times of Chinese history, there was an emperor who, when the people brought their sacrifices of meat and so on to be put in the cauldrons, he also scratched with a knife on the side of the cauldrons the laws of the state, so that all the people could read them and understand what they were. But the sages who advised this emperor said that was a very bad thing to do, because the moment people see the law written down, they develop a litigious spirit. That is to say, they think out ways of wangling around it. And that's what we do all the time, don't we? The moment Congress passes a law, tax law especially, all the lawyers get together and they fill it full of holes. They say, well, it didn't define this and it didn't say that. And some of those Confucians wanted to put the language in order and to make all the words mean just so. But the Taoists laughed at them and said, if you define the words, with what words are you going to define the words that define the words? So they said, therefore, the emperor should not have written the laws down, because a sense of justice is not something you can put in words. It's what our lawyers call equity. And you talk to any lawyer, and he, in discussing various judges around town, he will say, well, Judge so-and-so is pretty much a stickler for the letter of the law. But on the other hand, Judge so-and-so has a sense of equity. He knows when the law, the letter of the law, just doesn't apply to this particular case. And he just has an innate sense of fair play. That's the man to be trusted as a judge. So this is what the Chinese mean by a judge who has the sense of li, of real justice. It can't be written down, it can't be explained, because every case is individual. But what such a man has fundamentally in his heart, he trusts the good and bad of human nature. Human beings are complex. We don't know ourselves at all, really. Consider your nervous system. Neurologists haven't even begun to figure it out. And yet all your conscious decisions are based on this thing that you don't understand. You're unbelievably more wise in your nature than you ever will be in your conscious thoughts. Because behind your conscious thoughts lies your nervous system. And if you say, well, my nervous system is unreliable, it is just a bunch of strange, weird biological chances that have got mixed up somehow, then this very opinion that you're expressing, you see, is a function of that nervous system. So you're saying that you are a total hoax. You can't trust yourself at all. So that is a set of game rules that don't lead anywhere. It's totally self-frustrating. So you see, what the Chinese have developed here is a theory of nature. I said there are three theories. The Western mechanical theory, nature as an artifact, the Hindu dramatic theory, and the Chinese organic theory. Nature, human nature included, is an organism. And an organism is a system of orderly anarchy. There is no boss in it, but it gets along by being left alone and being allowed to do its stuff. That's what the Chinese Taoist philosophy calls Wu Wei, which means not doing nothing, but not interfering with the course of events, not acting against the grain. Now this is the time to introduce the second word, li, in Chinese. The first li meant justice. The second li is a character which had the original meaning of the markings in jade, the grain in wood, and the fiber in muscle. And it's usually translated reason or the principle of things. These are not very good translations. The best translation of li is organic pattern. Now look here. When you look at the clouds, they aren't symmetrical. They don't form fours. They don't come along in cubes. But you know at once that they're not a mess. A dirty old ashtray full of junk may be a mess, but clouds don't look like that. When you look at the patterns of foam on water, they never make an artistic mistake. And they're not mess. They are wiggly, but in a way orderly, and it's difficult for us to describe that kind of order. Now take a look at yourselves. You're all wiggly. We think, we're pretty ordinary because there are a lot of us that look approximately the same. So when we see a human being, we think, well, that's pretty much in order and kind of regular and it's okay. But we don't realize how wiggly we are. We're just like clouds, rocks, and stars. Look at the way the stars are arranged. Do you criticize the way the stars are arranged? Would you like them to form fours? Would you like them to be sort of set out like needlepoint on the canvas of the skies? There was somebody in the 18th century, in the days when they built formal gardens of clipped hedges and made all the tulips stand together like soldiers, who criticized the stars for being irregularly arranged. But today we don't feel that way. We love the way the stars are scattered. And they never make a mistake in their arrangement. What about mountain ranges? Do you criticize the valleys for being low and praise the peaks for being high? You just say it's great, it's the way it is. Now that kind of order, the artist pays a tribute to it by painting a landscape. People, in every national park, there's a place called Inspiration Point. And people go there and they say, oh, it's just like a picture. And nobody knew this 400 years ago. It took the artists to paint landscape, and then people realized how beautiful it is. Nowadays, artists are painting pictures of damp, stained walls and floors where people have dropped a lot of paint. And one day people will walk into a room where there's a lot of paint been scattered on the floor and a general thing, and they'll say, "My goodness, it's just like a Jackson Pollock." Oh, ain't it just like a picture? See? It always takes the artist to show us the vision. But of course, in the meantime, it is difficult. You go to an exhibition of contemporary non-objective painting, and a kind of square fellow walks in there and he says, "That's not what I call a picture." Because it's against his prejudices. But I say to people now, excuse me, wait a minute. Take a look at that again. I'm going to tell you something. That painting is a colored photograph of guess what? And he looks at it in astonishment and entirely new eyes. What could that be a photograph of? He begins to see it might be a photograph through a microscope of globules, of germs floating in liquid. It might be anything, but there it is, it suddenly comes at him. Goodness knows whether that was what the artist intended, but that's a method of giving people a shock, of seeing things in a new way. You know, a GI visited Picasso in Paris during the war and said, "I can't understand your paintings. They're absurd. Life doesn't look like that." Picasso said, "Do you have a girlfriend?" He said, "Yes." "Have you a picture?" He said, "Yes." "Show it." So he drew out his billfold, and there was a little colored photograph of his girlfriend. And Picasso looked at it and said, "Is she so small as that?" Now then, the idea of Li, the idea of natural order, is like this patterns on foam, patterns in jade, the shapes of the clouds, the shapes of trees and mountains. They are orderly, but we cannot put our finger on the order. We know it's orderly, but we don't know why. And we know it's completely different from a mess. From a mess. The order of nature is in that way then indefinable. When St. Augustine was asked what is time, he said, "I know what it is, but when you ask me, I don't." And so in the same way, the Chinese would say, "We know what the order of nature is, but if you ask us, we don't." The poet says, "Picking chrysanthemums along the eastern fence, gazing in silence at the southern hills, the birds fly home through the soft mountain air of dusk. In all these things there is a deep meaning, but when we are about to express it, we suddenly forget the words." That's Li. Nature as a self-ordering principle, but it doesn't really know how it does it. Another poem says, if you want to know where the flowers come from, even the god of spring doesn't know. This is a very remarkable attitude to nature. Politically, you see, if you translate this into politics, it is a high philosophical anarchy. And there's a lot to be said for this as a political point of view. That, in other words, government is always a mess.
because the state opposes itself to the people. We live under a constitution where we are supposed to be governed by ourselves. As somebody once said, down with democracy when we get it. Because the state always, the government always creates itself as a business in competition with all the other businesses. And it wins, because it's the biggest one of the bunch. The Taoists said of the state that it should be as anonymous and as unobtrusive as possible. That is to say that the emperor, instead of going around in processions and being heralded and flags waved, should be as unobtrusive as the head of the sanitation department. You know, he's a man, just a guy who goes around in a plain ordinary suit and really attends to his job. And the head of the sanitation of the city of Dallas goes around. You don't have a police escort and sirens blowing and flags waving. He simply does his job. And the feeling of Lao Tzu is that the president or the emperor should have the same kind of attitude. That he should simply help the people and retire and not claim any merits for it. Always withdraw himself. Always be behind the scenes. Not striving for power, but simply to help things along. Govern a great state, he said, as you would cook a small fish. Now, you know, when you've got a small fish in the frying pan, don't keep tossing it around and fidgeting with the spatula. Otherwise it'll fall apart. Do it gently. Softly, softly, catchy monkey. So then, here is a conception of nature as something you must trust. Outside nature, the birds, the bees, the flowers, the mountains, the clouds, and inside nature, human nature. Now, nature isn't trustworthy completely. It'll sometimes let you down with a wallop. But that's the risk you take. That's the risk of life. What's the alternative? I do not trust nature at all. It's got to be watched. You know what that leads to? It leads to 1984 and Big Brother. It leads to the totalitarian state where everybody is his brother's policeman, and where everybody is watching everybody else to report them to the authorities, where you can't trust your own motivation, where you have to have a psychoanalyst in charge of you all the time to be sure that you don't think dangerous thoughts or peculiar thoughts. And you report all peculiar thoughts to your analyst. And your analyst keeps a record of them and reports them to the government. And everybody is busy keeping records of everything. It's much more important to record what happens than what happens. This is already eating us up. It's much more important that you have your books right than that you conduct your business in a good way. In universities, it's much more important that the registrar's records be in order than that the library be well stocked. After all, do you know your grades are all locked up in safes, and they're protected from thievery and pilfering, and they're the most valuable property that the university has. The library can go hang. Then furthermore, the main function of a university is, what any sensible person would imagine, to teach students and to do research. So the faculty should be the most important thing in the university. On the contrary, The administration is the most important thing. The people who keep the records, who make the game rules up. And so the faculty are always being obstructed by the administration and being forced to attend irrelevant meetings and to do everything but scholarship. Do you know what scholarship means? What a school means? The original meaning of a schola? Leisure. We talked of a scholar and a gentleman because a gentleman was a person who had a private income and he could afford to be a scholar. He didn't have to earn a living, therefore he could study the classics and poetry and things like that. Today, nothing is more busy than a school. They make you work, because you get got through on schedule. They have expedited courses, and you go to school so as to get a union card, a PhD or something, so that you can earn a living. So that's a whole contradiction of scholarship. Scholarship is to study everything that's unimportant, not necessary for survival. All the charming irrelevances of life. But you see, the thing is this: if you don't have a room in your life for the playful, life's not worth living. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. But if the only reason for which Jack plays is that he can work better afterwards, he's not really playing. He's playing because it's good for him. He's not playing at all. You have to be able to be a true scholar. You have to cultivate an attitude to life where you're not trying to get anything out of it. You pick up a pebble on the beach, look at it. Beautiful. Don't try and get a sermon out of it. Sermons in stones and God in everything be damned. Just enjoy it. Don't feel that you've got to salve your conscience by saying that this is for the advancement of your aesthetic understanding. Enjoy the pebble. If you do that, you become healthy. You become able to be a loving, helpful human being. But if you can't do that, if you can only do things because they are somehow you're going to get something out of it, you're a vulture. So, we have to learn. We don't have to, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to go on living. But it's a great idea. It's a great thing if you can learn what the Chinese call purposelessness. They think nature is purposeless. When we say something's purposeless, that's put down. There's no future in it. It's a washout. But when they hear the word purposeless, they think that's just great. It's like the waves washing against the shore, going on and on and on forever with no meaning. A great Zen master said as his death poem, just before he died, "From the bathtub to the bathtub, I have uttered stuff and nonsense." The bathtub in which the baby is washed at birth, the bathtub in which the corpse is washed before burial, all this time I have said many nonsenses. Like the birds in the trees go, twee, 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 twee. What's it all about? Everybody tries to say, it's a mating call. It's purposeful. Trying to get their mate, attract them with a song. That's why they have colors. Butterflies have eyes on them. Self-protection. Engineering view of the universe. Why do that? They say, well, it's because they need to survive. Well, why survive? What's that for? Well, to survive. See, human beings are really a lot of tubes. And all living creatures are just tubes. And these tubes have to put things in at one end and let it out at the other. Then they get clever about it and they develop nerve ganglia on one end of the tube, the eating end,
called a head. And it's got eyes in it, it's got ears in it, it's got little organs, antenna and things like this, and that helps you to find things to put in one end so that you can let them out the other. Well, while you're doing this, you see the stuff going through wears the tube out. And so that the show can go on, the tubes have complicated ways of making other tubes who will go on doing the same thing, in at one end, out the other. And they say, well, that's terribly serious. That's awfully important. We've got to keep on doing this. But when Chinese say nature is purposeless, this is a compliment. It's like the idea of the Japanese have a word, yugen, and they describe yugen as watching wild geese fly and be hidden in the clouds, as watching a ship vanish behind a distant island, as wandering on and on in a great forest with no thought of return. Haven't you done this? Haven't you gone on a walk with no particular purpose in mind? Carry a stick with you, and you occasionally hit at old stumps and wander along and sometimes twiddle your thumbs. It's at that moment that you are a perfectly rational human being. You've learned purposelessness. All music is purposeless. Is music getting somewhere? If it were, if the aim of music of a symphony were to get to the final bar, the best conductor would be the one who got there fastest. See, dancing, when you dance, do you aim to arrive at a particular place on the floor? Is that the idea of dancing? No. The aim of dancing is to dance, is the present. Well, it's exactly the same with our life. We think life has a purpose. I remember the preachers used to say, when I was a small boy, I'd always hear it, we must follow God's purpose, His purpose for you and His purpose for me. When I asked these cats what the purpose was, they never knew. They didn't know what it was. They had a hymn. God is working His purpose out as year succeeds to year. God is working His purpose out and the time is drawing near. The time when the earth shall be full of the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. What's the glory of God? Well, they weren't quite sure. I'll tell you what it is. In heaven, all those angels are gathered round the glory of God. That is to say, the which than which there is no whicher. Catholics call it the beatific vision, the Jews call it the Shekinah. And there are all those angels. And they're standing around it and they're saying, Alleluia, 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 Alleluia. It means nothing. They're just having a ball. See, that's what happened in the beginning. When God created the universe, it was created like all stars, all planets, all galaxies. They're vaguely spherical. He created this and He said, have a ball. But before He said that, He said, you must draw the line somewhere. That was the real thing He said first. Before let there be light. That came later. First thing was, you must draw the line somewhere. Otherwise nothing will happen. You've got to have the good guys, the bad guys, you've got to have this, you've got to have that. The black and white, light and darkness. Must draw the line somewhere. Now, here's the choice then. Are you going to trust it or not? If you do trust it, you may get let down. And this it is yourself, your own nature, and all nature around you. There are going to be mistakes. But if you don't trust it at all, you're going to strangle yourself.
You're going to fence yourself round with rules and regulations and laws and prescriptions and policemen and guards, and who's going to guard the guards, and who's going to look after Big Brother to be sure that he doesn't do something stupid. No go. Supposing I get annoyed with somebody in the audience, and I'm going to throw this ashtray at them, but I don't want to hit my friend sitting next to that person. I want to be absolutely sure this ashtray hits that individual. And so I don't trust myself to throw it. I have to carry it along and be sure I hit that person on the head. See, I don't throw it because I can't let go of it. To throw it, I must let go of it. To live, I must have faith. I must trust myself to the totally unknown. I must trust myself to a nature which doesn't have a boss, because a boss is a system of mistrust. That is why Lao Tzu's Tao loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over them.